So let's take a look at Games Workshop's way to play competitive Warhammer 40k, with their requirements and restrictions in their new Grand Tournaments. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it would be interesting to go over Games Workshop's take on a competitive Warhammer 40k tournament, as a few days back tickets went on sale for their new US tournament series, and they published the event pack alongside that. I know Games Workshop official tournaments are only a really tiny thing within the big tournament scene, but it's still pretty interesting to see how Games Workshop would have their events run. So today I thought we'd just go over their mission pack, how they're organising the games, their prizes, their terrain and table setup, and of course their modelling and painting requirements for how they expect you to fill their models if you turn up. Games Workshop announcing a new tournament series is fairly big news. I'm not sure if they'll plan to expand this in the future, but over 2021 they've got 3 tournaments announced. They're calling it their US Open Series, and they've got an event in Orlando, Florida, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Austin, Texas. They're spread out over 2021 in August, October, and November. Tournaments in general seem to be getting a lot of tickets sold very, very quickly these days, and these appear to be no exception whatsoever. They look like they're going to be really big events, and it's $110 per ticket, or twice as much if you want their premium pack where you get some free miniatures and things. Games Workshop haven't run these sort of events for quite some time now. They did used to have a US tournament series, but they've scrapped that in the distant past. I believe since then the only really big events that they've held are the ones at Warhammer World in the UK, and largely big tournaments have been taken over by third parties, things like the ITC or WTC, and all manner of other big independent events such as the Las Vegas Open, Nova, Adepticon, and the London Grand Tournament, to name just a few. I think it's interesting to see Games Workshop running big events like this again, particularly ones that are a bit more competitive-minded. Their Throne of Skulls tournaments in the UK tended to be a little bit more on the casual side, with a hefty score component for sportsmanship and painting. In any case, I was very interested to see the event pack and just see how Games Workshop would have us play 40k and their take on the highest level of play. Firstly, I thought the time schedule for these events was kind of interesting. Rather than just being a bit more of a standard weekend tournament format, their events are actually going to be starting on a Friday. Then you have 6 games over the Friday and Saturday, 3-hour-long game affairs with some rough timing guidance that you can see on the right there as for when you should roughly be trying to get your turns done by. They're not enforcing any sort of chess clocks or anything like that. The games over the first 2 days are the ones that are used to determine the best overall winner, whose score is made up from painting and gaming scores equally. Then there's a further 2 games on Sunday, which are technically optional but everyone can play in them if they want to, whose main purpose is to determine the overall best general. I think it's interesting making some of the games optional. I suppose that means that you could have a shorter event for people who don't want to spend 3 days playing Warhammer, and are happy to call it a day on the Saturday night. Perhaps one of the most unusual features that they have in the event is an interesting bracket system that operates after Game 4, where they go down the list and split everyone into different brackets, each of 16 players. Say the top 16 will be put into the top bracket, and then the next 16 will be put into the second, and so on from there. For the last 4 games of the tournament, each bracket is kind of playing a mini-tournament of its own. So in theory, if someone wins and loses every game, then there should be one winner out of each bracket. That does mean, however, that the brackets are going to be set after round 4. So say, for example, if you were in bracket 2, you wouldn't be able to win the best general prize anymore, as that's the winner of bracket 1. In any case, there do seem that there's quite a lot of ways to gain recognition from the tournament. There's the best general and the runner-up, the best overall with equal parts painting and gaming scores, the best painted and the runner-up, though it doesn't seem to say how that painting scores are judged, and the winner if each bracket does gain a prize of their own, so it does mean that there's still something to play for in the last 4 rounds even if you didn't make the top brackets. I think it's an interesting system and maybe a touch more complicated than it really needs to be, but I quite like the design overall, and I'd be definitely happy to play in an event like this. For the games themselves, they aren't doing anything too different from most tournaments these days. They're Strike Force 2000 point missions from the Grand Tournament mission pack, played on the 9th edition 60-inch by 44-inch boards, and their armies follow all the GT mission pack rules for construction, so no surprises outside the ordinary from what you can bring, and they have the normal restrictions such as no specialist attachments or understrength units. Like quite a few more competitive events, they have actually given us a specific terrain layout now, and I think it's kind of handy to see what Games Workshop would ideally have people play on if they are really looking for a balanced game and a more competitive game of Warhammer 40k. They have chosen to go for a near enough symmetrical approach to the boards. They both have 4 pretty big obscuring ruins, 2 mini ruins set at diagonals, and then a few small areas of dense cover which are either in the corner or the edges of the boards. Apparently it depends on the mission map which one of these layouts you'd be playing on. I believe the one on the left for the more sort of like big board edges Dawn of War style deployment, and the one on the right for more corner style deployments. I'm not really sure exactly how to scale those terrain pieces would be. I strongly suspect that there'd still be decent movement lanes for things like Imperial Knights so they can actually function. But either way, it does seem like there's a fairly decent amount of line of sight blocking terrain on the board, which is definitely a good thing for competitive games, and not just having one player gunned off the table turn 1. Finally, of course, with Games Workshop, they do have more strict model requirements than most tournaments, and these have a fair few similarities with the ones that we talked about a few days back. That was from a Warhammer World Events pack, and it does seem that these are maybe a little bit less prescriptive in talking about every detail of third-party miniatures, but still I think largely amount to the same thing. As with most tournaments, they largely expect you to be WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, for representing gear on models, and fairly standard rules on converted miniatures. In general, they have to be approved before the game to ensure they're both clear to your opponent and you aren't doing any modelling for advantage. Similar to that Warhammer World Events pack, they're not quite as specific with certain FAQs, but they do say entirely from Games Workshop or Forge World, aside from scratch-built parts or basing materials. They don't go through an FAQ talking about 3D printed bits or anything like that, but I think it still amounts to the same thing. They are Games Workshop's events, so they don't really want people turning up with other companies' models and armies, though it's still far from ideal for anyone who's bought third-party heads or weapons or conversion bits. I believe it would be a risk to show up to one of these events with, say, some custom Imperial Guardsmen where you've bought some heads from a different company. As I said in the other video, I think I preferred their old rules where they said that at least 90% of the miniature must be from Games Workshop. That still shows that you've bought the model, and it allows for a little bit of stylistic customization. Perhaps one of the most interesting differences from the Warhammer World Events pack, though, is that it does specifically call out Forge World models. It says that Forge World models must be actually bought from Forge World, and they can't just be converted from either Games Workshop parts or anything else. I feel that that's a little bit harsh, to be honest, particularly if you were using Games Workshop parts to make Forge World things. I've converted a few Forge World choices from my Imperial Guard, say making some Earthshaker cannon emplacements and custom Rapier laser destroyers over the years, and I find the choice just a little bit peculiar, as quite a lot of Forge World models are really quite similar to Games Workshop ones, particularly things like Imperial Guard Chimera-mounted weapon platforms, and other tanks that are built on the same chassis as Games Workshop ones. I think technically even things like the Warbottom Warbike would actually run into that rule, something that's really commonly fielded by Orc players. I think technically that would mean that the only Warbottom Warbike that you'd be allowed to run would be the one from Forge World. I don't know how strictly that would be enforced, but I guess it would be a risk if you turned up with something like that. Otherwise, they're a little bit stricter on basing as well. The basing must be in line with the current kit sold, and not just the bases that the model was originally sold with. Not an uncommon requirement within the most competitive tournaments, to be honest, but I'm not sure I've seen Games Workshop actually mandating that so far. I think in the past their line has generally been just play them on the basis that they were bought with. Finally, their rules on painting aren't really spelled out all that clearly in the document. They state it must be to a battle-ready standard, as per normal, but they're a bit nebulous on things like colour schemes for detachments or representing different armies. Let's say if you were planning on using 2 different detachments within the army and you're not using the given colour schemes for those detachments, then you have to submit some pictures to their events team, though they don't really say the criteria for whether or not they'd accept or reject them. I guess it might be kind of similar to that Warhammer World Events pack, where if you have 2 different detachments, they need to be painted differently, and you can't just paint the bases or use loom bands or whatever. So anyway, let me know what you think of the events pack. I think for most part the missions and the scoring seem fairly well thought out, and it's interesting that they're committing to an 8-game tournament right off the bat. The terrain rules seem pretty reasonable to me, and the painting rules do seem kind of fairly expected given it's one of Games Workshop's home events. Perhaps the most interesting things there are the restrictions on Forge World models and on basing. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I will be keeping the regular 40k content coming, with new videos coming out most days. Finally, if you have been enjoying regularly and you'd like to help support the channel, then there is a link to the channel's Patreon page, which is down in the video description, which is how I can afford to make videos like this quite so often. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry to the monthly prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.